Becky said, my name is Kathy Slattery, and I work at StarNet Region 2. My office is in the Arlington Heights office. We work very closely with our peers in Region 6 and around the state and other ISB cohort projects as well, in order to provide support for folks who are working in early childhood and early childhood special education. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Here is a bit of the information. We're going to give you a little bit of information on selective mutism, how to make a diagnosis of it. That's not anything most of us can do, but maybe you'll learn about where you can send a child. A little bit about kids who are English language learners in SM. I know it's so important for many of you are those interventions and things you can do to support the children in your classroom. So we want to spend some time on that as a school and working with families. And I'm going to leave you with a lot of resources because an hour and a half is not enough time to really learn a lot about selective mutism. So, but there are many places for you to go and learn. And I've also got some resources of some events coming up if you'd like to learn more. So I'll tell you about that. So let me tell you a little bit about my beginning with selective mutism. And I think I'm going to credit and or blame Becky for this. Many years ago, probably 14 years ago or so, I got an email, and I think it was from Becky saying, oh, here's a conference in right near you. It was in Rosemont. It's about selective mutism. That sounds interesting. And it's like, was right around the corner from where we were. So I thought, oh yeah, that is. And you know, at StarNet, we're all about learning about new things and professional development in young children. So I thought, I think I'll go. So I did. It was very interesting. By the end of the day, they brought all the Illinois people together and they said, oh, where are you from? What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. And I told them what we do at StarNet. And they said, we should put you on our website as one of our state contacts for selective mutism, which I thought was pretty funny because it was day one for me with selective mutism. I went in completely cold. But, you know, that's kind of what we do at StarNet is we share information and resources and connect people with those. So I said, okay, I'll try. And over the years, I have learned a great deal about SM from families of children with SM, from treating professionals, and from other teachers as well. So like many of you, I'm guessing, my background is in early childhood special education and special ed. So as Becky said, I'm not able to diagnose or treat children with SM, but I am able to share with you strategies from those folks who do and want to do that today. So I went to the conference. I've gone to others since. I've worked with a number of treating professionals. Now we facilitate a parent support group that goes on. We meet 6 to 8 times a year on Zoom right now for families of children with SM, and it's a very active group. I am also a state coordinator, which means my name goes on their website and a contact. So families who are looking for information or how to get a diagnosis can contact me if they're from Illinois or nearby. And one thing I did a number of years ago was I thought I really need to get some skin in the game with this. I really need to get more hands-on information. And so I did apply to work at a 1-week summer intensive program for children with autism, which was held in the Oak Brook area. It's a program called Adventure Camp. And I got to spend a week plus about 4 days of training around that, learning how to support individual children with selective mutism. Went through significant amount of training in order to do that with the evidence-based practices. And I have to tell you, it was one of the best professional development experiences of my lifetime. I thought the days were going to be long and the days were very quick. So it was 5 days, 8 to 4. No breaks, no nothing, you know, you're eating lunch with the kids, maybe you can use the bathroom, that's about it. Everything else you are hands-on with kids, and then an hour beginning and end of the day with goals and planning and things like that. So that was a wonderful experience for me to learn about that, and anyone who feels like they want to get some good training and get their hands down and dirty with selective mutism, that's a great place to do it. It is all volunteer. So that is my background in selective mutism. And so I've continued to learn over the time. I'd like to know, and maybe you could put something in the chat, is anyone here who is a parent or family member of someone who they believe has selective mutism? If so, you know, just kind of give me a little Little something in the chat. Yes, I have someone with SM in my family. And I'd love to hear. Okay. And the rest of you, I'm assuming, are mostly early childhood and early elementary professionals who are working with children. And so I'm glad you're here. This is really the place where we want to begin with SM. We want to start early because here's the thing, guys. We work with children with many different sorts of developmental challenges, right? And with some, we can help them make progress to overcome. With some, our job is to provide a appropriate education, a high quality education, help these children move as far as they can, but they're always going to have their disability. The interesting thing about selective mutism is they can overcome it with the appropriate treatment. So you are really in a place as an early educator, an early therapist to help children overcome this disability that can have long-term impacts on their lives. So thank you for being here with us today and being a part of this group. So here's where we're going. We're going to understand SM as an anxiety disorder. Okay, thank you for letting me know who is thinks they may have SM in their family. We're going to understand it is not a speech and language delay. It is not a behavioral issue in terms of defiance. It is an anxiety disorder that impacts children's ability to participate. Going to learn about the signs and the symptoms, learn those classroom strategies, and I am leaving you with lots of resources and places to go for help. Before we talk about kids with SM, let's take a look at ourselves and see if it can help us to understand a little bit more about this interesting condition. I don't know about you. I am not good with snakes, right? I have never had a bad experience with a snake. None has ever wrapped itself around my body or my neck or bit me or anything like that. And yet you cannot get me in the reptile house at Brookfield Zoo. It would not happen. And if you dragged my body in there, I would freeze, I would panic, I would not be able to function well at all, right? And yet there's no real reason for that. It is just an irrational fear I have, right? I've had no experience with that. Some of you may have things that scare you as well, even though there's no causation for it, nothing happened to you. So I'd like you to think about that. Does anybody have something they're afraid of? I've had people tell me that going across a bridge just really completely makes them so anxious and so worried, even though it's a sturdy bridge, right? So are there anything, can you think of anything in your life, spiders, you know, bunny rabbits, whatever it is, doesn't have to be an animal, it can be a thing, quicksand. You have nightmares about quicksand, although you've never had any quicksand in your life. What are some of those things that scare you and frighten you? Oh, look at that list. Look, the truth be told, there's lots of things, right? Yeah.
Lots
Birds.
of snakes, spiders. Somebody said space. I don't know when they think they're going up to space, but
Deep ocean and space, yeah.
Sharks.
Heights, very common for heights, right? I am not good when we go to this 102nd floor of the, you know, whatever it's called now, the Hancock building. Flying, yep, absolutely. Sharks, probably never been bitten by a shark. Somebody said public speaking, yeah, and walking over a grate, yeah. So here's the thing, for many of us, we can avoid these scary things. And thank you for sharing. It's not an easy thing to have to admit, but those things that scare us, right? Most of us can avoid the snake house at the zoo, right? I can stay far away. I can be outside. I can watch the polar bears and the lions and everything else, and it's fine. And I can still have a good life and function quite nicely. Think about your fear. Think about kids with selective mutism. Their greatest fear is talking in group settings or participating in group settings for some of them. They have to face their greatest fear every single day. They are walking into that reptile house at the zoo. They are climbing over that bridge. They are doing whatever it is. So it takes a lot of bravery to be these kids. So please keep that in your head when you're thinking about selective mutism, when you're thinking with your students. This is really hard for them. And like me with the snake, nothing happened that caused it. It's a part of their being. And so we want to think about that too as we move forward. Thank you all for sharing some rather personal things about what's scary to you, but keep that in the back of your mind as we start to talk about selective mutism. Just a quick history, what it is and what it hasn't been. Way back in the 1800s, selective mutism was thought to be something that was caused by a traumatic incident. So it was kind of a post-traumatic stress response, and that was a choice that the person was making. Okay, somebody jumped out and said boo, and now they're choosing not to talk. Okay. Well, by the time we got to the mid to early 1900s, it was changed to elective mutism. And elective mutism was considered to be a voluntary choice. They were choosing not to talk, but there was no antecedent factor that caused the fear. Okay, so they still thought it was a choice, but they didn't think it was due to some sort of a traumatic incident. It wasn't until the 1990s that selective mutism was correctly diagnosed as it is now, as not being a choice and not caused by some sort of a incident or a factor or an abuse or something like that. So it's important to think about that because treatment has changed over the year. And that term selective, I think this is important to talk about. That term selective does not mean the child is selecting or choosing not to talk. The mutism instead is selective to the setting or the situation the child is in. So the child might be at the park talking to their parent comfortably. Someone comes along who's new to the child, even though they didn't do anything wrong, but they may change their behavior. Their face may change, they may stop talking, they become uncomfortable. Similarly with going to school. The mutism may be selective only to school and not to other places, or it may be in school and other places, but not at home. Okay, does that make sense? And you feel free to put questions in as we go along. We'll probably cover most of them in the presentation. Okay, so that's a little bit of that history. Most of the time, the greatest impact is in school settings, but we do see it in other settings and situations. We have some kids whose SM is so severe, the only people they talk to are the people they live with. They don't talk to grandparents. They may not talk to neighbors. They may not talk in other settings. So we need to really think about how debilitating this is for them. I want to talk about the fact that much of the information I am sharing here comes from the Selective Mutism Association, from the work of Dr. Stephen Kurtz, Dr. Carmen Linus, Dr. Amy Katraba, the Child Mind Institute, a number of folks. So I'm not making any of this up. I'm pulling it from the experts throughout the country, and it's a lovely group of people. But a little bit about what SM is. Number one, it's an anxiety disorder. It's not a speech and language impairment, okay? So these are kids who are unable to speak in certain settings, and yet they can speak in others. And I'll tell you, people still don't get it right because we don't get much training about this in undergraduate or graduate education, whether you're in speech pathology, you're in education. We had a parent in a parent support group who had a PhD in developmental psych and had never heard of SM until she had a child with it. So we don't get this training at school. We really need to learn on it in-service training. School is a huge trigger, but other places can be triggers as well. These kids not only may struggle with speaking, but they also may struggle with activities of daily living, using the bathroom, getting help, eating, those sorts of things. In places outside their comfort zone. That's why schools really need to make sure they come up with a plan to help the children. What happens oftentimes is, with only the best of intentions, families, teachers, others get in the habit of speaking for the child, right? The child isn't able to talk. We kind of fill in those blanks. Unfortunately, what that does is that just kind of reinforces the mutism, and we'll go into more of that. But that is typically what happens. We don't mean to do anything wrong, but it's just a habit that we have to change. The majority, about 95% of children who have selective mutism have symptoms of social phobia as well. It's important to remember that kids with selective mutism can be on a spectrum, kind of like kids with all sorts of other challenges, from less anxious and less social phobia to more anxious and more social phobia. Those kids who have less social phobia, they have gotten into the pattern of non-speaking, but they are out playing with the kids and interacting, doing things. Those are kids that are fairly easy to support and treat. But those kids who have more anxiety and more social phobia are going to require some more work to do. Interestingly, twice as many girls as boys have selective mutism, which is kind of different from the world of children who have special education needs. It tends to be a little bit different. And the numbers state about 1 in 140 children will have selective mutism. It is underdiagnosed, it is undertreated. And so that's why I appreciate Region 6 wanting to talk about it today. These are kids that don't cause trouble in school, so they tend to get less attention and less support and services. Schools really need to think about bathroom issues and eating issues and getting help and all those things. Story recently from a parent about their child was put on the wrong bus. It was the first week of school, the bus's codes weren't correct or something. The child, drove around the wrong bus for a long time. So this can be a real challenge.
Kathy, I have one question.
Yes.
Can a child not speak with their teacher, but when placed in another classroom, speak?
And thank you for that. That's the selective piece of selective mutism. What we see is large group settings, and group settings are the hardest. But you will also see that these kids, they have some very rigid thought processes very often. And it could be that they're comfortable speaking, let's say, to a teacher, but not to children, or to children, but not to a teacher or teachers. Or they can talk in some settings and not in others. Maybe outside on the playground, they could whisper in your ear, but in the classroom, maybe that would be more anxiety provoking for them. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so it could happen. What I'm going to do now, we were playing with this earlier, is I am going to stop sharing for a minute. I want you to get a little sense of selective mutism and what it looks like, and a treatment strategy similar to the one I participated in a few years ago with Adventure Camp. So you will hear here about 2 children with SM. You'll get some nice background. You'll see Dr. Kurtz, who's one of the leading authorities, and you will see some kids and getting some interventions and how they work.
Common, just about every kid experiences a paralyzing moment.
Hear that, Beck?
Show and tell, or meeting someone new. But imagine a child so stricken with fear, she goes without speaking for an entire school year. You're about to meet 2 such children, their parents desperate for help, and one man who says he can cure them with a technique that just might work for anyone with a severe phobia. Here's ABC's Juju Chang.
Jake Semmel has trapped himself inside a world of silence.
So what's your favorite TV show?
He speaks to 7 adults in his life.
That's it, just 7 adults. With everyone else, he won't talk. His parents were baffled.
He hurt himself at camp this summer and he didn't tell anybody. I said, "Did you cry?" He's like, "No." I said, "Did you tell the counselors?" He's like, "No."
Maya Walker is the same way. Watch, she doesn't move a muscle during her school's pageant. Maya's extreme social phobia made it impossible for her to blow out her own birthday candles.
Happy birthday, Maya!
Not talking to your peers, not talking to your teachers, just being, even for recess, being next to the teacher like this.
She never played during recess?
No.
Her mom and stepdad say Maya didn't speak a word for the entire school year. They made this video just so the kids in her class could hear her voice.
Do you talk a lot at home? Yeah, I talk a lot at home. Wave goodbye to your class, Maya. Bye-bye, class. I have to Merry Christmas.
Maya is an extreme example, but nearly all kids have fears of one kind or another. Doctors think that's because parents rescue their kids too soon from what they're afraid of, which only makes the fear grow. Dr. Stephen Kurtz of the Child Mind Institute believes he has an answer. Jake and Maya suffer from selective mutism. He says not only can he cure it, he can do it in just 1 week. His therapy is called Brave Buddies, which exposes them to the very thing they're afraid of, speaking in public.
What's the key to the week here?
Repeated exposure to the same situations that they've been avoiding like the plague, but providing kind of training wheels until they can do it confidently on their own.
The grown-ups are taught to stop overprotecting them and simply wait 5 seconds before jumping in.
Maya, what job would you like today?
So on day 1, rule number 1, Maya is allowed to feel the painfully long silence, long enough for her to answer.
You're not sure every time you're not sure.
Questions are designed to force verbal answers. They're offered a choice instead of nodding.
Jake, what job would you like? Caboose or craft helper? Or something else? Caboose. Great choice.
Jake's every mumble is praised. Soon, they're set out into the real world to interact with strangers.
Hi.
You're about to watch 6-year-old Jake face his biggest fear.
What's up, buddy?
Where's the zoo?
Where's the zoo?
Our microphones can't even pick it up, but for Jake, it's a small miracle.
Maybe we should get 3 stickers for Have a Nice Day.
The kids wrap up day 1 by cashing in stickers they earned at a prize store. But first, the kids need to engage another stranger, me.
Welcome to the Brave Buddies prize store.
Jake is up first.
Are you a guy who likes bubbles or something different?
Again, barely audible, but his whisper might as well be a roar.
Do you like painting projects or something different?
Now it's Maya's turn. Despite her bravery, she suffers a setback when the anxiety overwhelms her and she has an accident.
Yep, I think she needs to go to the bathroom, that's fine.
It's called Brave Buddies for a reason. After a quick change, she somehow musters the courage to try again.
Do you want jewelry or something different? Something different. Okay, let's keep looking.
The next day, Jake's still struggling with talking, and eye contact is still difficult. But then he shocks everyone with a full sentence.
No. Wow, whoa, I didn't Happy birthday.
And for the girl who's never blown out birthday candles before, this is a celebration 7 years in the making. We show Maya's parents video of a daughter they barely recognize.
You can see it down here. You can see it down here too. I'm so proud of her. It takes a lot of courage to, if you would have seen where she was 2 years ago, definitely not the same child.
For Jake and Maya, the boot camp is over, but can they keep it going into the school year? The old, silent Jake still comes out at times.
Are you making this an easy pattern or a hard pattern?
But the new Jake perseveres.
Easy or hard pattern, Jake? Hard.
Maya still has trouble joining the crowd at recess. But in class, her voice is finally being heard. Facing up to their fears allows them to unlock their voices and rescues their childhood. For Nightline, I'm Juju Chang in New York.
Okay. Thank you for your patience for that. I'm going to get back to, what do you know? My PowerPoint went away too. Okay.
Kathy, you have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Is it selective mutism when a child communicates in school using gestures or nodding, but does not verbally communicate in English or a native language? Student has also never been heard making any noises.
That would be something that you would need to check out with a treating professional. It could be there are some children who have SM who have comorbidities as well. And so those are some things we need to make sure that someone with a strong background, and we'll get into the assessment piece in a little bit. I'm just going to go with this for now. But you would need to look a little more carefully at all of the factors around that in order to make sure that you made the correct diagnosis. Nodding and gestures, I mean, that is communication. But again, we need to be very careful that we are not making a misdiagnosis on a child who might be an English language learner. And we've got some slides on that too. So I'm just going to share it this way because it's working better when I just use the slides like this. So you'll all forgive me if I do that. Let's talk, first of all, Steve Kurtz, the doctor you saw in that, would be the first person to tell you that an intensive camp like that is not a cure. What it is, it's a really good jump start. Usually we run these sorts of events late summer so that kids get a week of experience with positive experiences with talking with others in a variety of different settings in a school-like setting. We call it camp or Brave Buddies camp, but it really very much mimics a school setting. It's like 30 hours of therapy all in 1 week is what it basically looks like. You need to understand it's also pretty expensive. These are not free camps, but folks whose children participate in them, I'll tell you, it was wonderful to do it because I saw a lot of miracles happen. So, so it's a one opportunity. Now, not all children do that. Some participate with weekly treatment or monthly treatment or whatever. The thing is, the parents and the school need to really be on board with the sorts of things that we want to do with the kids. So let's take a quick look at what is that diagnostic criteria that may help answer that question that we just had about is that this or that. SM is a consistent failure to speak in social settings where we would expect children to talk despite the fact they are able to speak in others. So we want to rule out a child who is nonverbal everywhere does not have selective mutism, right? But we do have children who can have comorbidities. We've had kids with autism and SM, but at home they talk. Now the signs and symptoms and behaviors of autism are present as well, but because of their anxiety, they may not talk in other settings. There are children with Down syndrome who have selective mutism. It can show itself in other ways, but these are children who can speak. It also, we look to make sure that the non-speaking is interfering with educational or occupational achievement. You know, working in StarNet with young families, with young children and their families, there's a lot of hope, but it's really hard when I get a call from a parent of a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old and they say, what do we do, right? Our kid has been in school, he had an IEP, he's still not talking, he can't get a job. These are really hard things. They don't tend to have the friendships other kids may have, and we'll get into that more later. But SM can definitely interfere with long-term productivity, educational opportunities, and friendships. We need to make sure that it's not something that is due to a lack of language and that it's not due to another specific thing. It has to last more than a month. And so we need to make sure that we're getting the right diagnosis. Again, knowledge of the language. We need to really tease out kids who are English language learners, whether they have SM or they have something else. So we'll go into that later. And we need to make sure it is not due to something else, such as autism or another sort of a mental health issue, which may be instead of SM. So that's where we get those treating professionals in. We get that really good history. So let's see, where does SM come from? What is the cause of SM? Well, first of all, it is a mental health issue. It is an anxiety disorder. There is no evidence that SM was caused by trauma or abuse or neglect. Please understand this. Many of these families will call me and feel very guilty. What did I do? Did something happen? Blah, 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 those sorts of things. If it's SM, it was not caused by a traumatic incident. Now, there are other conditions. Traumatic mutism is one of them that could cause children to change their behaviors, but that has a different treatment form. So the appropriate diagnosis is really important. Genetic predisposition. Here's an interesting thing. About 80% of children who have selective mutism have a family member who has some sort of an anxiety difficulty. Usually it's pretty close. Oftentimes it's a family, it's a parent, sometimes it's an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, a cousin, something like that. But there's a very strong genetic predisposition. to selective mutism and anxiety in the family. So just like we get our, blue eyes and freckles, same sort of a thing with many of our behavioral and mental health traits as well. So that's something important to remember. You may be dealing with an anxious parent as well, right? We also are hearing information that there are some possible structural differences in the brain, that amygdala, that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism that we talk about in the brain, that kids with SM may have a hyperactive response to things that might be fearful, and they have a very hard time bringing it down once they have that response. They, you see a spider, you might, oh, I don't like spiders. You might step on it or throw it outside or whatever. For them, it's a major thing. And so we need to look at some of those research pieces as well. Okay. What are some of the risk factors for SM? These are important to know. Again, I told you about 80% have a family history of anxiety of some sort. May not be SM, maybe OCD, it may be generalized anxiety, maybe social phobia. But we see this very, very often. A child who comes to us initially with a shy, inhibited, or anxious temperament. And then it could be if they're an English language learner, if there are some other sorts of things going on, frequent moves, whatever, that it could turn into SM. Most children are not only selectively mute, but they have social phobia or generalized anxiety. They worry about a lot of things, not just non-speaking, right? So we need to think about that. About, for you SLPs in the group, about 40% of children who have selective mutism have an expressive language disorder of some type. So we want to make sure we rule that out. Central auditory processing disorders and other sorts of conditions can definitely impact. We want to make sure that we support the kids in those areas as well. English language learners, there is a higher incidence in kids who are English language learners. Again, think about the fact a child with a shy, inhibited temperament put into a situation where things are challenging for them, an anxious child anyways, they could end up with SM. We talked about no history of trauma or abuse. Okay, so those are some of the typical risk factors for SM.
Kathy,
And
we have
some,
two questions.
Sure. Thanks, Becky.
Well, Jennifer says, what if a student talks well while in the classroom setting, but doesn't talk when the mother is around?
Well, again, I don't know. That would be kind of an unusual way of doing it, of SM representing itself. I would look into a multitude of factors around that, maybe some of the family dynamics. A preschool child, that would be kind of unusual. I would probably want to rule that out, have a treating professional, a therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, check into that if that's what happens. And is it a problem? Is it everywhere, or is it just when the teacher's around, So those are some things we need to look at.
And then Maria asked if you could repeat the percentage for the ones with expressive language disorder.
About 40%. And I've got a couple slides on that coming up.
And then Kathy, if anyone's in the waiting room, let Marianne let them in.
Okay.
She'll take care of that. Thanks.
Great. So what are some of those triggers? Many of these children, it seems like when they were born, the parents will say they were a little bit different. They were those super clingy kid. They never went to anybody else. They struggled, those sorts of things. Maybe triggers, maybe just places where there's some awareness is when children go into some sort of a group setting, going into childcare, going into preschool, going into kindergarten. You may be the first person to really see how different this child is when they're not in their home environment. And the families often don't know because the child talks at home, right? Sometimes these are the chatteriest kids in the house. They can be very bossy. They can have very strong opinions, and they're talking at home. So when the parent hears they're not talking in other settings, it can come as a real surprise to them. Frequent moves can be another reason. Again, putting that anxiety on top of other sorts of things can impact as well. Multilingualism, children who are English language learners, that can definitely do that. And let's say that child has some anxiety, has some tendencies. If a family member has a very negative reaction, come on, why don't you talk more? Come on, you can talk at home. Why don't you talk at school? Those sorts of things. And they're nagged a lot, or if program staff do that, that can make a child go more into themselves than they were before. What keeps it going? Lack of diagnosis or a misdiagnosis. Many of these kids are sometimes diagnosed with autism because sometimes as part of their anxiety, they don't make very good eye contact. Sometimes they will have some behaviors that look more like autism, but that could be their anxiety coming out looking like some other things. So we need to make sure we get an appropriate diagnosis. Again, appropriate interventions are huge. And I'll tell you, I've had calls from teachers, and one of them was a Region 6 teacher years ago who came to a workshop or webinar we did, came to a conference we did, and took the information back, sat down with the team. She contacted me later. She said, Kathy, we realized we've been doing it all wrong with this kid. And we changed how we interacted. They kept bribing him to talk and trying to coerce him to talk. He was a preschooler. We changed our plan. We came up with a new plan. He started talking. By first grade, he had a speaking part in the school play. Mom invited the preschool teacher to come, and she said we sat there and cried together because now he's fully verbal. So teachers can make a huge difference if we're using the right strategies. So appropriate interventions early. Treatment is very expensive, and we all know that mental health services are hard to come by these days. Insurance very often does not pay for the sorts of treatment we get with selective mutism. Many of our families go into debt, max out their credit cards, do other sorts of things. Family doctors, pediatricians, and others don't always recognize it. So, you know, many families have told me the doctor said, oh, she's just shy, she'll grow out of it. Well, no, and you're missing that prime time for intervention. Shielding the child from social engagement. Well, that's okay. You don't have to go out and play with the kids in the neighborhood. You just stay here, right? And not giving them those opportunities can also impact as well. And pressure for verbal communication when children are definitely impacted by it, sometimes can really impact and just kind of take it down and make it worse. So we need to be really, really careful that we're using the appropriate sorts of strategies with our kids. All right. Any questions, Becky?
Yes, Della has a good one. Is it typical for kids with selective mutism to participate in activities in school and interact with adults, but just not talk? Or do they typically not engage and participate?
Yeah, that sounds like a child who maybe has less social phobia, maybe, right? Child can run around the playground, play games, interact non-verbally. And we're going to talk about is they've gotten into a pattern of non-speaking, again, because of the anxiety, but they can participate. Now, that's a child who maybe is slightly on the less severe end than that child who is kind of rigid all day, standing at their table, not able to move, right? So it could be possible, absolutely. And certainly there's things that we could do to help that child as well. Quickly, some associated features of SM. You might see they look very shy. They may cling to their parents. Sometimes they do things that look almost like OCD. OCD is an anxiety disorder as well. They may be compulsive, have to close the door 10 times or check things. They look negative. They look negative. That's because they're trying to control their environment and stay safe. So that negativism, that no, I won't do it, that's because they're safe if they're here. A gentleman that I have met over the years, his name is Jonathan Kohlmeyer, wrote this book. He is an adult man now, finished with college, learning to play the game, My Journey Through Silence. Jonathan was treated by Dr. Stephen Kurtz years ago. And one of the things he said was so interesting, and he can't really explain why he did that, but when he was like in second grade, he went to a school in New York. He went in school the first day of school. The only place he felt comfortable was standing under the light switch next to the door in the room. That's where Jonathan spent all day, every day, the entire school year was standing under the light switch. He didn't go to a table. He didn't go to a desk. He was just there. Now he had a school that was like, you know, whatever works for you sort of a thing, right? That looks like negativism. That looks like, oh, he's so stubborn. Why won't he try other things? He said it was the only place he felt safe, right? It doesn't make sense to us or in our heads, but in his head, it was a safe place to be under that light switch. And as an adult now, he said, I can't even say why I felt that way, but that's all is what I knew. So these kids, and oftentimes they're holding it in at school so long that they'll go home and raise quite a ruckus with their parents where they feel more safe. They can have temper tantrums and be very bossy and things like that. So understand when the parents say, you know, she's crazy and shrieking at home with all of her demands after school, that very much may be the case, even though you don't see it. They will probably very likely use nodding and gestures and nonverbal sorts of communication to try to communicate when they're able to. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Teachers and others, you need to come up with a plan because many of these kids feel like there's a spotlight on them. They think people are looking at them, watching them at all times. Jonathan didn't get a sense that he made himself more unusual by standing under a light switch all year. He didn't have that kind of external understanding that he made himself look unusual, but he always wanted to blend into the wall, right? So these kids often can't eat in front of other people, particularly in school. Using the bathroom is a real struggle for them. So we need to come up with a plan because otherwise it can be a real problem for them. They may not eat all day. They don't use the bathroom all day. We have accidents, things like that. And other possible comorbidities are here on the other slide. They can have a number of other developmental issues as well. Okay.
One more comment, Kathy.
Yep.
I don't know, it's kind of a question. So a teacher saying a kindergarten student needs to talk more as a report card comment could be selective mutism.
Well, I don't know. That's something, and we're going to talk about, we're getting into the diagnosis stage in just a minute. So if a child's talking some, it would depend. Let's hold on to looking at the SMQ in just a minute. Again, some other sorts of, you were asking about speech language disorders. I said 40% of children with SM have some sort of a speech language disorder. And this is from the work of Evelyn Klein, who is out of the LaSalle University in Philadelphia. And her research has shown this to be a fact, and that the coexisting issues may be aligned with SM, it may be independent of SM. A lot of central auditory processing, a lot of expressive language. Sometimes we hear the child got early intervention for delayed speech, so they were like late talkers. And those are some things we really want to look into. But if you're a research person, here's some of the research on it right here. And Evelyn Klein is a good one for that. Now, sometimes people say, oh, you know, he's just shy. He's just, you know, more shy than most kids. Well, not exactly, because SM is more than shyness. A shy child can get help if they need it. Shyness is a normal personality trait. The child will be a shyer personality at home and at school as well, right? But kids with SM have this very dual personality. They can be very talkative and chatty at home, but they're selectively mute in other settings and situations. Kids with SM have a very long warm-up time. Birthday parties. Oh my gosh, Halloween is coming up. Halloween is a nightmare for so many of these kids because what do you have to do? You got to talk, right? Trick or treat, right? These kids would rather be home throwing candy in buckets and going out and trick-or-treating. So shy kids can answer questions. Shy kids age appropriately can call for help on 911 or whatever. Kids with SM can't do that. Shy kids tend to not look terribly uncomfortable. The kids with SM, they tend to be pretty rigid, particularly when they're little. My little girl at adventure camp the first 2 days just was kind of like a stone. You know, her face was flat affect. Her body was very tight. Here's the miracle. By day 5, we took her to, we took all the kids to an amusement park as part of the exposure treatment for them. It was all therapy. And she climbed up the top of a climbing wall with a harness on. And there she was at the top, and she looks down, she waves to all of us, says, hey, everybody, look at me, I'm up here. I mean, we were sobbing watching this. This 5-year-old who could barely move on Monday was climbing a rock wall and yelling to the group on Friday. So, but these kids can look very frozen. So let's talk about diagnosis. It sounds like that's something of interest, as it well should be. Oftentimes our early educators are the first to see signs of SM. because again, the family does not see this other side of the child, or if they do, they're saying, oh, he's just shy. I'll just answer for him when we go to the restaurant. I'll say he wants chicken nuggets, right? And families don't get this, right? Nor do we in school. It's important to have a mental health professional skilled in SM to be part of the diagnosis. We certainly want to involve the family doctor, but I'll be honest, most family doctors don't have any background in SM. And so some will refer the child to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Others will say they're just shy. Others just say they won't know. So it's a problem. A diagnostician may want to see a video of how the child talks at home. So might be some of you speech people who might be doing an assessment of the child, right? Oops, sorry. The family should be interviewed and the child observed, and then there may be some other evaluations that are done as well. Another tool, and I believe this was included with your handouts, is a copy of this and the scoring mechanism. This is the Selective Mutism Questionnaire. It is a tool developed by Dr. Lindsay Bergman at UCLA and her team. And it is a very useful tool to use in the assessment as a piece of the assessment for children with SM. So you can see on this here, if you had a student in your room who was getting an assessment, you might be asked to complete these portions of it. Does the child talk around peers? Does the child talk to selected peers other than teacher or friends? And answering those questions. And we say always, often, seldom, never. And look at this profile here for this child at school. Never, 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 never. With family, because we want to rule out, is this a language disability? Is this something else? How does the child do when talking with family? And then what do we see in other social situations outside of school? And what you can see from this profile is we're seeing a very big gap between what happens in school and what happens in other places. So this would be one piece of the puzzle about selective mutism that we might use. Make sense?
Kathy, one more question.
Yep.
I have a student that says, I don't know to almost every question I ask him, even though I know he knows the answers. He's a very smart child. Would this be selective mutism?
I don't know. How's that for an answer? Does he talk in other settings and situations? You know, we would want to go back to the SMQ. We'd want to talk to families. If he says, I don't know, maybe it's some other sort of anxiety. Maybe it's a language difficulty. Maybe it's something else. So you would need to get a better picture of the child in all sorts of situations. Maybe rephrase your questions in other ways too. So I don't know is not an option, but we would need to know more information about that. Earlier, the better in terms of diagnosis. It can be diagnosed as early as 3 years. Not every treating professional will, but some will. Some kids were those clingy kid from infancy. Here's what I want to push with all of you folks who are professionals working in early childhood and early elementary. There is so much hope for young children to overcome this condition. The mutism, I like to describe it as a muscle that is being exercised. So every time I say, Becky, do you want to play with Barbies or you want to play with the blocks? And Becky just stands, or I'd say, Becky, you want to play with Barbies? And Becky just kind of looks at me and she doesn't answer. Maybe she shrugs, maybe she points, whatever, but she doesn't give me a response. And I know it's within her verbal repertoire to be able to talk that much. Every time I just say, oh, Becky, I know you love Barbies. I'm just going to give you the Barbies. Here you go, honey. She's had an opportunity to avoid responding to me. It increases the avoidance and increases the selective mutism. Now, that's not Becky's fault, right? When that happens, because it's really hard for her. So we have to do is break it down into smaller pieces for her. Okay. So we want to make sure that we start early because the treatment is easiest and best with young children. That doesn't mean you can't make progress when kids are older, but it is easier then. And there's often a lack of diagnosis. We get kids at 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14 years old diagnosed then because nobody was able to figure it out before. And again, these sorts of mental health services are expensive and hard to come by. Many of our families are on wait lists for a long time. Again, a higher incidence in children who are multilingual learners. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but what we know is we see typical progression in speaking for multilingual learners, and we need to give them the time and the experience. Some kids with SM, because they may have an anxious temperament and then that language issue might push them over. We need to make sure if they're selectively mute that they would not be speaking in both languages. And these kids never go public with their speaking if they're ELs who are selectively mute. So we need to tease that out, give them a little bit more time, and make sure we support them in all the good ways that we do with kids with SM.
Sorry, Kathy, lots of
Yep.
questions. First of all, back to the SMQ. What would the total be to consider them selected?
Well, that varies with the age of the child. So I think I gave a score sheet if that went out with the handouts. So I would suggest take a look at that. It's also available online. It's not a protected thing. So if you Google the Selective Mutism Questionnaire scoring, you should have that. And I believe I sent a copy to you guys to disseminate. If you don't find it, email me. Okay.
And then do these kids use devices to talk, or is it just making the issue worse?
Thank you for asking that. Very often people will say, well, we'll just get them an iPad or we'll just get them a voice output device. Again, these are kids that can speak, and this is a condition that can be overcome with the appropriate treatment. That could be just reinforcing the mutism. We want these kids to be talking. They can do it if we give them the right supports and we have the right expectations for them. So if you need to do some safety things, if you need to have a card they can turn over on to show they need to go to the bathroom, or if you need to come up with some visual supports for safety and things like that, I would do that, but I would not move them on to an AugCom communication device, which is what folks often think they should do. So better to do the appropriate interventions first, and we're going to get to those now. So if left untreated, though, this is what I hear from families. He doesn't have any friends. He sits by himself in the cafeteria, or he sits in a special room in the cafeteria. These kids have a higher incidence of self-medication. They really struggle with the peer interactions. Many of them, they don't have friends. And so we don't want that for our children. And it's easiest, we can control them so much more when they're little. We can set up situations. And I have so many families of kids who've overcome SM. So we really want to work on it. And just important to know, every day a child is not speaking is not neutral. It reinforces the non-speaking because they have a million opportunities to avoid talking, right? Kathy, do you want milk or do you want juice? Oh, Kathy, you had milk yesterday. I'll give you milk again. Okay. I haven't had to talk. I got something to drink. It reinforced my non-speaking. Okay. So I'll give you some strategies to work around that in a minute. So we really want to move forward with that. And we need to be open to special education supports and services because this can have real implications. The majority of kids with SM have typical intellectual functioning, right? Intelligence-wise, they are right there with everybody else. But if we aren't able to assess them well, they are going to start to lag behind. They may have some learning disabilities, they may not. It just kind of depends. But if they're not having those opportunities to interact with peers, we do see they tend to have a shorter mean length of utterances for you speech people. We wonder if it's because of lack of practice or if it's something else. So just some things. And participation with other kids. These are the kids, when they're young, they tend to be pretty socially accepted and included. You know, we do all that sweet stuff in preschool and kindergarten with everybody's a friend, blah, blah, blah. But we know what it's like when kids get older, and we really need to be helping them overcome this so that they are not the child who doesn't speak and doesn't fit in. We also need to plan for those special events. What if there's going to be a sub? What if there's a fire drill? Bus schedules, things like that. If these kids can't advocate for themselves, and fire drills and safety alarms and things like that, we need to be able to plan in advance for that and walk through it with the kids because it's really, really hard for them. I'm not going to show any of this today, but this is a video of an intensive for older children, high schoolers. And you've got this YouTube link here. This video was filmed by BBC a few years ago of an intensive program in New York for teenagers called We Speak. And if you think you can just let SM go away and they'll learn to talk and they'll be fine, these are kids very impacted by their SM and they're teenagers, and they don't have much time left until they're adults, and they are really having to do some work. And you will see in this video the impact of SM has on these kids. Even within a week, we can make some big differences, but it's not a cure, but it's a jump start for them. So that's just a resource for you. Thinking
Nicole,
about, yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
Nicole has, she has a student that won't talk at school at all, pre-K. I've spoken to mom about it. Mom says the student talks a lot at home. However, they will not talk to grandma. The student's movement during song time and morning meeting is virtually non-existent. It's like the student is frozen. If I ask them to do something like clean up or get the coat, they will follow. If I ask them, BB Bumblebee, can you say your name for me? The student will not talk.
It's something to think about. Think about all those other factors. Is it a child who's an English language learner? Maybe start to do a little investigating with the family, find out what's going on at home. Maybe mom can send a video, because you may be seeing different things, but there's some things there I would wonder about. Okay, thinking about whether a student needs an IEP or a 504 plan. Sometimes schools, again, these are kids that behave, they don't cause trouble in school typically, and so they tend to be less supported very often. But it could be an impairment, it could be a disability for a child to not be able to speak in school, issues with bus, issues with bathroom, issues with being sick. These are all things we may need to move to an IEP or a 504 in order to get the child the supports they need. There is not any one particular support that is appropriate for these children. I've had some kids in our parent support group whose families have children in private or parochial schools. Families will say to me, what's the best school for my child? And I say, it's the one that'll work with you. The one that'll work with you and with your treating professional if you've got one, because that's what it's going to take, a real team effort. The typical IEP categories for kids with SM, the SM community really kind of likes other health impaired as one, but sometimes speech and language might be appropriate. Another sometimes is emotional behavioral, but that's just a decision for a program to make. And possible special education supports for these intervention strategies we're moving into now. Might be a resource teacher, might be a speech language therapist, might be a social work or someone else to support the kids. We do see a higher incidence in sensory processing difficulties in kids with SM as well. They're the kids who have trouble with their shirt tags or the line in their socks and all those sorts of things. So sometimes OT can be a lot of help with that. But if the child gets an IEP, it's not a bad thing, because that's the way we can build in some of those supports and services and some of the push-in services we're talking about now. Something important for you to think about is these kids, an important thing to think about is contamination. These kids have very rigid minds. Okay, I like to describe their brain as kind of like a T chart, take a big piece of paper, make a T. In their minds, it's kind of like places I can talk and I'm comfortable. On the other side, places I can't talk and I'm not comfortable. And there is a very rigid line between the two. We have families who say, we go on the way to school in the car, he'll chatter, chatter, chatter. We get to the corner, we'll return for school, and silence. We stop talking then. These kids are very rigid. Their world is not fluid in terms of their boundaries. Maybe they can talk to Miss Becky, but they can't talk to Miss Mary Ann. And it's not that any one of them did something or the other. There's just some things going on. So we need to think about that. Family told me years ago, their child in kindergarten, full-blown SM. They worked real hard over the years. By 5th grade, child was talking well in school. One day they're in the grocery store. Mom sees the kindergarten teacher from 5 years ago coming down the hall, coming down the aisle. And she's so excited to say, look, he's talking. She stops and she, look, remember him? He talked now. What that child did who'd been talking and comfortable? He couldn't talk because that teacher is contaminated. That's someone he doesn't talk to, even 5 years later. And a good person, not anybody who did anything wrong to the child, right? So these are some things for you to understand what goes on in their brains. Okay, so what are some of the effective interventions? School, you can be such a wonderful help. It really is important whenever possible to get a treating professional working with the child and family as well. For young kids, 2 to 7-ish, we use what we call behavioral therapy and family education. The parents are huge interventionists in this process, and they have to learn to change their parenting style a little bit to build in some of the little challenges that we do. So, and behavioral therapy, where we do some reinforcement and rewards. Fade-ins and shaping, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. Teachers, I know you've got lots of things to do in your classroom. You've got rooms to set up. You've got things to get together. You've got meetings to go to. For kids with SM, it's really helpful if we do what we call a fade-in advance, where we might have the child come in with the parent. Nobody's in the room. We come in, we kind of ignore the child at first. The parent gets the child talking, playing a game, Hungry Hippos, whatever it is. And then we slowly work our way over and do what we call a fade in. If you are willing to put that time in before the school year, because we can't do it when we got 15, 20, 30 kids in the room. We can do it on our own. So if you're willing to do that, you can make a huge difference in the start of that child's school year. We use systematic desensitization. For kids who are a little bit older, we can start to talk about how they feel. With young kids, we'll do some relaxation things, anxiety reduction things. But with older kids, we can do a little more talk therapy while also doing behavioral therapy as well. And then the other effective intervention, along with therapeutic interventions and strategies, could be medication for some children. It can be very, very effective when used with therapy. So what does not work for SM are all these good things, right? Bribing, coercing, you come on, if you want to get a check on your report card, you've got to talk. Or I've heard parents bribe with Disney World trips, and you'll get a puppy and all those sorts of things. Probably too big of a goal for that child, and too far. Child have to reach too far for that. So we're going to be taking tiny little baby steps. Embarrassing the child. Everybody's got, and you have to understand that within the family, there's oftentimes conflict as well. Mom says, we got to figure out, we got to get some help. This is a problem. Maybe dad says, oh no, he's fine. I was just like that. Maybe he was, but the families may be in conflict. There may be a mother-in-law or father-in-law says, oh, there's nothing wrong. He'll grow out of it. There's another one who's saying, you've got to do something for that child. So there can be a whole lot of opinions going on, and we need to be careful because a lot of times a lot of people are talking around the kid and they are actually talking around the kid. Understand that also reinforces the mutism. If everybody stands around you and says, you don't talk, he's not talking, it's a problem, he's not talking, you're not going to talk more because that's the child you've become. Important to understand that some of the hardest goals for our kids with SM are things like manners. Statements, please, thank you, hi, goodbye, I'm sorry. We leave those for down the road goals, and we've got that child speaking comfortably in all settings. Do not make that an early goal for any of your kids. It seems like it should be easy. It is not easy. And for these kids, it's very difficult. So don't do that. And we also want generalization of anything we learn. So we really need to learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Parents and children, and sometimes teachers too. We really need to build into our speaking repertoire small steps towards helping that child. We can't throw that child into the deep end of the snake pit. If you threw me into the snake pit right now, I would not fix my fear of snakes. It would just traumatize me. So we're going to start with tiny little steps towards that. But we are going to have to change. Families have to change, teachers have to change, children have to change, and come up with some of the small steps, okay? It does take a team approach, and hopefully there's a treating professional if you can find someone, and not everybody knows how to do it right. And then this could be a part of the team as well, all of these other folks. The classroom teacher should certainly be knowledgeable and aware. Sometimes that teacher isn't able to do direct interventions with the child because you got a whole classroom of kids, right? I would definitely encourage you to do fade-ins in the beginning of the year and getting that child comfortable. but it might take, and that's where the IEP helps, it might take having a resource teacher or a speech therapist or a social worker, whoever gets it in how to treat kids with SM, to be that person who can do the interventions to help that child be more comfortable. Let's get into some of those specific strategies for school. First of all, make sure they're safe, right? Come up with a communication system with the family in advance. Some kids might wear a wristband that shows different things they need. They might have cards they turn over. We need to come up with a system. Some these kids are probably never going to raise their hand for, I got to go to the bathroom. So what some strategies some folks do is they kind of pick out 4 kids. Okay, these 4 kids at this table, bathroom time. And then that child goes with everybody else. Now, they don't like to use the bathroom in a public place. It can be very challenging. These kids have a higher incidence of bowel and bladder issues and urinary tract infections because they tend to hold it. So that can be a challenge. So please come up with a plan. Some teachers take the child once every hour and just to kind of get them comfortable with going there, even if they don't go. So work out a plan with the family. If you have a child who can talk to one or a couple people in the classroom, that's great. Continue to encourage that. What we want to do then is fade in additional talking partners. So, you know, if I'm the child with SM and Becky's my friend in school, and I'm able to talk with her this year, and you're thinking about placement for next year, please don't say, we're not putting Becky in with Kathy. We're going to make Kathy talk to other people. Instead of doing that, we're going to use Becky as a conduit. We're going to have Kathy and Becky together, and then we're going to slowly fade in a 3rd person and then maybe a 4th person and expand that child's world in terms of speaking partners, okay? Forcing a child to talk, punishing a child to talk. I had a parent tell me that the school principal, this teacher sent the child down to the office. This was a 7th grader because he wouldn't talk to him. And the principal said, sit down, you're not going outside or doing anything until I hear you talk. Well, that's not going to work. That principal is the highest power source in the classroom. So why would he talk there? He was even more stressed. So do not punish or consider it to be defiance. Understand that while, and as an early childhood educator myself, we're always talking about those WH questions. Tell me about who, what, where, those sorts of things, open-ended questions, right? That's good. Not so good for kids with SM because they're always worried about what their response would be and if it would be right and everything else. So instead, as we're starting to get communication with them, we're going to ask what we call our forced choice question. So if a child's sitting down, I'm going to say, Kathy, do you want a blue crayon or a red crayon? And I'm doing my intervention. Blue crayon or red crayon? Now, the other thing is, because we tend to jump in right away whenever the child looks uncomfortable, once we've started this practice, we're also going to wait 5 seconds. And that's very hard to do. 5 seconds seems like a lifetime. But again, we might do this in a quiet place first. Kathy, want a blue crayon or a red crayon? We're going to stop and wait. If Kathy just points, and we're at the point we're doing this, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to, blue crayon or red crayon? And I'm going to re-ask the question. I'm going to wait again. And so there are going to be some steps we're going to take on that. So we want to ask these forced choice questions. Now, if I don't get an answer after that, maybe Kathy didn't want blue or red. Maybe she wanted purple, right? Kathy, you want blue, red, or something else? Be quiet and wait. Very often, if the child's at the point where they're feeling comfortable, you'll start to get something else. Oh, something else. Oh, did you want orange or purple? Purple. Wow, thanks for letting me know. We're also doing a nice reinforcement process with that, with some sort of a sticker, check mark, or something like that, because these kids do real well initially when they've got some tangibles, okay? So those forced choice questions can be very helpful. Understand also, those greetings at the beginning of the day. Hi, Kathy, how are you? Well, that's great, but that can be very intimidating to kids with SM. You might want to try using something slightly different, like good to see you. That there is not an expectation of a response then, but the child might feel more comfortable. Or thanks for coming to school today. rather than goodbye. Because again, we've kind of been conditioned to respond to those. Okay. Here's some other specific classroom strategies that fading in can be so important, and you want to work with the family on that. Seating preferences. I told you about Jonathan. He was under the light switch all year. That isn't necessarily what we want, but some kids want to be able to see the door, want to be in the front of the room or the back room, whatever. You want to think about that based on your classroom contact. Again, pairing a child with someone who they are already talking with is a good thing. Eye contact. It's really important to remember many of these kids struggle with eye contact, and maybe we don't push it. So if I'm over at the fine motor math table with Kathy, the preschooler, rather than sit across from her, I might sit next to her. Oh, Kathy, you're playing with that puzzle. It has ponies and cows and pigs and all those things. I might sit next to it, keep the focus on the puzzle, not so much trying to get that eye contact then. We're going to focus on something else. She's more likely to be able to talk then, and she's more likely to be less intimidated with requests for eye contact. So don't worry about eye contact early on. Small group instruction is easier than large group instruction. Usually we start with one-on-one when we're doing some of the interventions, and then we move forward. Becky, we're going to run out of time. These kids tend to, again, feel they're the center of attention, and so be real careful with praise. We like to give low-key praise. When Kathy says blue crayon, when I've asked that question, I say, oh, Kathy, thanks for letting me know. Now, if I've got a system set up where I'm giving her a sticker or a checkbox or something for talking, because we're going to have a prize at the end of the day for brave talking, then, I'll make sure she sees that. But you know what we're like in kindergarten and preschool, right? We're always, but we don't do that with kids with SM. Keep it low key, okay? A key worker might be that person who develops the relationship and works on some of these initial basic skills. And when you are upping your demands for the child, you only want to make one change at a time. Could even be just a change in location. If the social worker, and I'm a big fan of integrated therapy, but the one group that probably doesn't do well with therapy in the classroom initially is the child with SM. So we might need to start to work on some of these things in another setting where it's a quiet environment. There aren't a lot of people around. So whoever is the intervener, they may need to work with them in another place. Discourage others for speaking for the child. So make sure everybody knows Kathy can talk. Sure, she can talk, and when she's comfortable with, she will, right? And this is all part of what we do with social emotional supports, right? We talk about everybody's different, everybody has strengths, there's things. So the same thing with kids with SM. Sometimes we tend to leave these kids out in terms of being conversational partners. So we need to be real careful with that. Because we might assume Kathy's not going to talk, and then we just kind of glance past her. So we want to make sure we keep them in the conversation. Sometimes humor or using another child first. So again, remember our point here is to encourage comfort and try to get some speaking out. And this is not something you do right away, but let's say my example here is if I say Becky's sitting next to Kathy, and I say, Becky, do birds have wings or do birds not have wings? Forced choice question, right? And Becky says, birds have wings. Her friend Kathy's right next to her. Kathy, birds have wings or no wings? Now she's got a little cue from her friend, right? So now she knows the answer. She doesn't have to worry so much. Our goal is comfort in speaking. Birds have wings. Thanks for letting me know, Kathy, right? So we're going to be real careful about that. These kids may do better with chanting and unison and things like that. They also do better with humor, right? So if the kids come to my door and I open up the door on Halloween and I say, Merry Christmas, and they're more likely to talk, and we kind of do something a little bit off like that as well. We're going to move quickly through some of these others. Evaluations, use the family to help evaluate if you're trying to gather information, get video from home, build in all those sorts of things. Some things to know about SM is some kids will use what we call an altered voice, and that's okay. Let that go. Let the treating professional deal with that. They may whisper, they may bark, they may growl. The father's really get annoyed with that. but let it go because at least they're voicing. So accept it. We'll work on volume over time. Okay. And some of the maintaining factors we have with SM is here's the cycle. We ask a question. Kathy, do you want blue crayon or red crayon? Kathy doesn't quite know what to do. She just kind of turns away and acts like she doesn't care. Oh, here, Kathy, you like blue and red. You can have both. Well, again, we just kind of reinforced the mutism. We feel better because we haven't put Kathy on the spot. Kathy doesn't have to answer. And now another opportunity to not speak. We're not going to have time for this video, but I will maybe send this link to Becky to send out to everyone. One of the first things we want to do when we're working with a child, if we're doing a fade in, beginning of the school year, again, one-on-one situation, we're going to work on our pride skills. And this looks like a floor time session. For those of you who've heard of Stanley Greenspan and floor time, right? We're just going to have this interactive session. We're not trying to teach anything. We're not going to ask questions. We might use Legos. We might use crayons, especially with the little ones. We might have a simple game, something like that. And we're going to use labeled praise. Oh my, look at, you put that red Lego on top of the blue Lego. Reflection. Oh, I think I'll do one too. I love to build with Legos. We're going to do the same sorts of things. We're going to talk about it. We're going to have fun. And we're just building that rapport. We're not asking questions. We're not trying to find out if they know their colors or anything else. Okay. This is a good way to build that rapport with children initially. Also might be something a staff member might do in a quiet place outside. And I will send this link out to everyone. This is on YouTube, Dr. Amy Katerba, and she's doing some examples of that. So nonverbal activities that we might use for pride skills. Here are just some examples. Coloring works really well. Special games, reading a book with the focus on the book and not on the child. Hungry hippos, magnet tiles, marble runs, all those sorts of things. Anything where you can get that child to do something creative and the focus is on something else. And again, you're commenting on the activity without judgment. And those are really good ways to build in and build that comfort and relationship. Then we start to move to what we call forced choice questions. That's where we start to say, oh, now are you going to put a blue crayon on or a red or blue Lego on or a red Lego on? Which one do you want next? Probably weren't going to do that in the first session, but sometimes it does happen. And then we wait 5 seconds and then we might rephrase the question. At Adventure Camp, we went, which is the camp for kids with SM that I was at. In the morning, we practiced all morning playing ice cream parlor, right? Because we were going to the ice cream parlor in the afternoon. And so my little girl and I all morning, we practiced. Do you want chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? Chocolate. Okay, thanks for letting me know. She got a sticker. We practiced inside, outside, in the hall. Outside, we'd had, playground area. And then she tried it with other counselors in the room. Every child was assigned a counselor. And then she tried it with the teacher assigned to the room. And then we had a stranger come in the room who was not a stranger, but that was the assigned role. So they got lots and lots of practice in advance. We don't just expect kids to do these things the first time. By the time we got to the ice cream parlor, we practiced on the way, we practiced outside, we practiced inside. The lady at the counter was able to say, do you want chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? Chocolate. Thanks for letting me know. They got another sticker, they got their ice cream. So we put a lot of work in before we get to these steps, but this can really work very, very, very effectively. And it breaks this cycle of avoidance. So we practice those goals, they get an external reward. And here's another thing. For those of you who don't like external rewards, for typical kids and for many kids, we don't believe in them either. For these kids, it changes the cycle of avoidance. By Friday of Adventure Camp, we no longer did stickers. They had gotten successful enough. We no longer had to do that with the kids. So we faded it out over the week. It was really cool. So we want to change that cycle of avoidance to kids building new skills. Now, we don't have time, and I hadn't planned on showing you this anyways because of time, but I have given you these 2 video tutorials for you to look at for fading in or sliding in, so you can see exactly what they look like. And both of these are fine. The first one is a little more family oriented. The second one is a little more practitioner oriented. Here are just some ideas for reinforcers and rewards. Again, we fade them out over time, but they're very important initially. You saw that little girl in the video go to the prize table at the end of the day, and our kids would get very excited. They were very cheap little prizes, but you'd think they were, wonderful. School year transitions, important to plan. Try to put the child in with a talking partner if they have them. Try to build in some time over the summer to spend with the teaching team if possible, and make sure the staff gets professional development on selective mutism because there's so little of it out there. And you don't get this stuff in teacher school, right? I know I didn't. So we really need to get it in other places. What do we talk about to the child? When the child's struggling, we know it's hard. I love the turn being brave, working on your brave talking. So, oh, that's right, you're working really hard on being brave. Sometimes when parents are going to see a treating professional, they don't know quite what to say. They say, should we tell them they're going to help them to talk? And I say, no, don't do that. Someone who's going to help you feel more comfortable, someone who's going to help you feel more brave. Okay. The other kids, we always want to have that expectation that, yes, Molly can speak and it's hard and she's working on being brave. This is a really nice book that actually Marlene from Region 6 told me about, The Magical Yet. And it's all about a child who can't do something yet. And I think that sounds like a really great one to talk about all the kids who can't quite do everything yet. With family and friends, try not to have discussions about the child in front of the child. It just kind of puts more SM, all over the child, all over the place. So please try to do that in other settings. I wanted to show you how much hope there is. This was one of our parents, with her permission, gave me this slide, the impact of appropriate treatment. This little girl was pretty significantly involved. Over the course of time, she needed treatment, she needed medication. Take a look at her in the years when she was little. And Mom said, Kathy, when you show this to people, make sure they know these were the good years when we even got a picture. Kids with SM very often don't like having their picture taken. You may have seen that on picture day. They really struggle with that. But look at her face. Look at it. Her lips are pursed, her shoulders are up, her chin is down. You can see the anxiety on her, right? They worked really, really hard. She was on medication for a while. She got a lot of treatment. She's not on medication anymore. It was weaned off her over time, which is what our goal would be whenever possible. This little girl was in show choir in 8th grade and on the debate team, and she's now a senior in high school looking at colleges, and I'm sure will be very, very, very successful. So there's a lot of hope for these kids. I want to get to resources quickly, Becky. I know we're getting to the end. Very important to intervene early. The best predictors of success are the age of the child. Younger is better. Less severe is easier than more severe, but it can happen. Family involvement, school involvement, and working with a treating professional. You've got a few slides here on medication as another support. What Dr. Kurtz and others will say is if the child has not made progress, and if the family is able to do interventions and the school is doing interventions, and the child isn't making progress after, let's say, 10 sessions, then maybe we want to think about what we could add to the mix, and it might be medication, which is hopefully a short-term solution. Short-term might be 2 years, but that's short-term. It can really make a change in the life of the child. I want to show you a few resources, and I really appreciate your time. These are a number of good books on selective mutism. We have some in our Region 2 library. Dr. Katrapa's book in the bottom is particularly current and helpful. So if you're looking for books, these are available in a number of different places. Social media. There's some great stuff on social media. There's a Facebook group for, this is a very lonely life for many of these families because they can't find anybody else as a kid with issues like theirs. They love the parent support group because they have a time to talk to each other and people who have similar sorts of things. So there are some Facebook pages, they are closed. A couple of really good videos on YouTube by Dr. Kurtz are on exposure lifestyle and why we might use medication. They just shouldn't have to work this hard. This is an excellent book by Dr. Katraba. Actually, I just booked her to talk to our SM parent support group in January on schools and IEPs in the evening. So I'll make sure I share that with Region 6 when we get that out. Dr. Kurtz has a wonderful series on his SM Learning University, which will give you about an hour presentation and then a tutorial on all of those sorts of strategies with pushing in, fading in things. If you like podcasts, this young lady came up with a podcast and it's quite extensive and very good. Her name is Chelsea. She had SM and she and her mom do the podcast, and she's excellent. Just next month on November 9th, Dr. Carmen Linus, who's in the Oak Brook office at ATS, is going to do a evening session for parents and or professionals, but no credits being given, on understanding exposures and extinction learning in SM. And so she's going to be teaching some of the skills and how we might do that in a variety of different places. And if you're interested as a professional to learn, you certainly can register for that on our website at Region 2. This is a great resource on the Selective Mutism Association website. It's a toolkit for teachers, and it's about 12 pages written by some of the experts in the field. And if you want a big primer on it, that's a good place. Here's some great websites. Dr. Kurtz's website is just amazing. It's a free tutorial on selective mutism. And there are some other good ones as well. You are welcome to contact me at StarNet. That's our website. You have my email. If you have families who are looking for some supports, you are welcome to give them my email as a representative of the Selective Mutism Association. That's a volunteer role. And I am happy to help them find some resources. And again, as you leave, I'd like to remind you of this quote. Courage is not always a roar. Sometimes it's that quiet voice at the end of the day that says, I'll try again tomorrow. Remember, whatever your fears are, you don't have to face most of them every day. I don't have to see that snake every day. I don't have to go in the reptile house at the zoo. But these kids have to face what's really scary to them, which is speaking in public. And so it's really a challenge for them. Becky, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now. That was a quick review, and I will send the link for Dr. Katraba's